Blog Talk Radio. Hi, and welcome to The Art of Film Funding. I'm your co-host, Claire Papin, along with Carol Dean, author of the best-selling book, The Art of Film Funding. Carol is also the founder and president of From the Heart Productions and the host of this show. Today we are joined by our guest host, filmmaker Heather Lenz, best known for directing and producing the Sundance documentary, Kusama Infinity. Our special guest today is Eleanor Church, a UK-based award-winning filmmaker and photographer who has been making films and using photography to tell stories for the past 20 years. She has worked on a wide range of projects, both documentary and commercial, with a particular emphasis on stories that focus on society, environment, women, human rights, migration, and supply chains. Among her accomplishments, Eleanor is pleased that her filmmaking work has led to policy change. Today, we'll discuss her first feature film, X Trillion. It's a documentary about an all-female team, including sailors and scientists, led by environmental activist Emily Penn, as they sail across the North Pacific Ocean to carry out cutting-edge microplastics research.
Thank you so much, Claire, for the introduction, and thank you, Eleanor, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. I'd like to begin by asking you to please tell us who Emily Penn is, how you found out about her work, and what led you to make the film.
Sure. It's lovely to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So Emily Penn is the co-founder of an organization called X Expedition, which has as its mission to take women to see the real issue of microplastics. So over the last over a decade now, she's been taking crews of women on different expeditions to different parts of the ocean, different seas, to see firsthand what the real issue of plastic pollution is, which is that often you can't actually see it. We see lots of images of big bits of plastic and debris on the news or on programs and things like that. But the thing that she really wants to highlight with her work through X Expedition is the danger of microplastics, which are so tiny that often you can't see them, but then also the chemicals that are associated with them. And the reason why she takes women on these expeditions is a lot of the research on the health impacts of these microplastics and chemical pollution hasn't always focused on women, but women are affected in particular ways, whether that's through fertility issues or through female cancers. That all sounds quite depressing, but the really exciting thing is that she's really solutions focused, and so we have this massive problem and we could all feel very depressed and demoralized by it, but actually she really wants people to see this as an opportunity for change and innovation and collaboration to come up with solutions and to change how we live with plastic, I guess. And so the crews are always made up of women from different professions. In our group, we had on our expedition, we had me, a filmmaker, we had 2 scientists, we had an engineer, we had a product designer, a packaging designer, a geography teacher, an agronomist. So this whole sort of range of people who see the world and see issues, but also can see the solutions to plastic from all different angles. And I found out about her work because I've been working on campaigns really to do with plastic pollution. Our expedition took place in 2018, so it was quite a while ago now. And at that time, people were really talking about the impact it was having on marine life, but not so much on humans. But I knew that there was this big untalked about issue here. And so I was really interested in her and drawn to her work. But also very much the thing that people were talking about was just how awful it was and not offering anyone any kind of hope. they were looking for a filmmaker for the expedition, and I applied, and I went through the interview process and the selection process, and I got on board. And I could have just made a short film and documented the trip in a short format, but I really felt like, as someone who's made films about quite big issues over the years, and really tried to bring in the human element or a narrative into it that struggles sometimes, because that storytelling is really important to get people interested in something that they might not be naturally interested in. Plastics. Does anyone really want to watch a film about plastics? Maybe not. I'm not sure even I do. But tell me that there's a story about a really cool, awesome group of women sailing to one of the most remote places on Earth, where at points we were closer to people on a space station than we were to people on land, and then introduce the idea of this huge issue that we're facing, but then see how they're going to work together to come up with solutions and ultimately really rely on each other to get through this epic 3-week, 3,000-mile expedition, through highs and lows, and then bring in the narrative like that. I thought this really has the opportunity to become a great feature film and to reach a wider audience, really. So that's the backstory of it.
I see. Well, yeah, it's definitely a very inspiring film. So you explained that you met Emily before the sailing began, and I'm wondering if you met the other women before, or did you meet them on the day you were leaving? And also, what was it like to live in such close quarters with the people you were filming 24/7 for nearly a month, unable to even call home?
Yeah, so I hadn't actually met Emily before I got on the boat. I'd had some phone calls with her and Skype conversations. Zoom wasn't on anyone's radar at that point. And the same with the other women. We'd had a couple of group calls. And because I knew I wanted to make this film, I did arrange to have one-on-one calls with them just to get to know a bit more about them. But there's only so much you can understand or get to know people over a phone call when everyone's feeling a little bit nervous, apprehensive about the whole thing. So I had 2 really small children at the time. They were 1 and 3, and so I couldn't really go out much before the boat actually left. So I arrived the night before everyone met. We met at the boat, and on that first day we went and did a beach clean together on the far side of Oahu Island, and it was an incredible introduction actually to the issue, because we got to this incredible, beautiful, wild beach, and when we looked down at our feet, it was covered in multicolored tiny grains of sand, but they weren't sand, it was obviously plastics. And so we did a beach clean, and that was a good way to start chatting to each other, not in those really close quarters, but then we set sail very early the next morning. And I think that we all felt quite nervous about what was ahead, and apprehensive about the journey itself, but then also what we were going to see and what we were going to feel about it, but then also this thing that we really were together for a long period of time in a very small space. And I think that maybe I had a particular situation in that I had decided that I would film the film in an observational way. So lots of documentaries, you do some interviews and then you do some cutaways, some general shots, and then you piece it together. But I really wanted to take the opportunity to make the audience feel like they were coming on the boat and on the expedition with us. And to do that, I wanted to film people pretty much all the time so that they could also feel like they were experiencing what we were experiencing. And that was quite a tricky thing to ask of people, especially who you haven't met. And so I had to be very friendly and get people to trust me right from the word go, and to work out people's personalities quite quickly and how they'd react to the camera, but also just to try and make people feel really comfortable with it, because there really was nowhere to hide, I guess. And it went really well. It worked really well. We worked really well as a team. Something that Emily said to us before we left was, got to really look out for each other and try and be kind to each other, because that really goes a long way. And that's a great message in life, generally, I think, and in the world, maybe one that we need to hear, especially today. It was really quite it probably wasn't as hard as I thought it might be, being in that small space altogether. There were 14 of us in total. We had a bunk each, all kind of crammed on top of each other, and I had all of my equipment in my bunk with me. We worked on shift rotation, so we were set into groups of 4, and in those, when you were on shift, you'd be sailing the boat, you'd be cooking, you'd be cleaning, you'd be doing all of that, but I was filming at the same time. And I think that we quickly got to know each other pretty well, and to respect each other, and to work out, that we had to rely on each other to get across this huge bit of water. And for that whole 3 weeks, we didn't see another boat or another person at all. And so we knew that if there was a problem, we were going to have to get ourselves out of it. And so that solidarity was really important.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, did you have any previous sailing experience?
Not really, no. My cousins had always done quite a lot of sailing, and I'd been on boats sometimes with them, but never paid any attention to what anyone was doing. And I'd been on a short 2-day sailing course with my husband in Spanish the year before, when I could speak Spanish now, but I couldn't speak Spanish then. And I wasn't very well, so basically I had 0 sailing experience. But there was Emily, who's a very good sailor, and then there was a first mate and a skipper and a second mate, and they really showed us how to do it. Some of the other crew members knew how to sail. Michelle, who lived in San Francisco, had never been out on the water for more than like a little pootle around the bay. So it was quite a big, it was a big thing for all of us, to be honest. But I didn't really have any sailing experience, no.
Well, it was very brave of you to go out and make this film. And what was the most interesting thing you learned while doing the filming and just making the movie in general? And what was the scariest part of making the film?
I think the most interesting thing about making the film, I mean, taking away the nuts and bolts of actually making a film, which is a whole other sort of different thing. As you know, as a filmmaker, it's a huge challenge to get the funding together to start making your film, to make your film, to film your film, and then the post-production. I think I thought that it would be quite a fast turnaround, but it took us 6 years in total to make the film. And so I guess I found it interesting how little funding there is for some of the most important stories, I guess, of our, that we need to be thinking about. But in terms of actually being on the boat and making a film in that sense, I think I found it really interesting seeing different people's perspectives and angles, and feeling like there is a lot of work going on to come up with solutions and to think of different ways that we're doing that we are often coming up against maybe political inaction, profit over doing the right thing when it comes to business sometimes, but that there are so many people chipping away at this and coming up with new ideas and new ways of doing things really across the board. And we've just had a UK cinema tour, and we had 33 cinema screenings, and each of them with a Q&A discussion, and I was at most of them. And for those Q&A discussions, we had different people from different industries and different professions talking about the issue. And every single one of those discussions was completely different from the next and looking at the issue from a different place. And I found that really reassuring to know that so many people have got eyes on this. I guess the thing that I also have found interesting in the process of this over these 6 years is that when we went on the expedition, the narrative was very different to where it is now. People's understanding is much greater. It felt like there was a real surge in action in terms of personal action, but also structural action around people to address the plastics issue. We had COVID, and that seems to have pushed everything to the bottom of the agenda. But maybe we're coming back at it with very much the angle that the film is on, which is let's not make this just an environmental issue. Let's make this a real health issue and a human issue. And that seems to be where we are now. So I think that's interesting. In terms of the scariest thing, I think it's just the scale of it. We were in, like I said, in such a remote place, and the fragments that we were pulling up were tiny, whilst also seeing sometimes like a 4-legged plastic chair, that you might have if you're at a barbecue or something, float past. And we were hundreds of miles from land, and that's crazy, or a toothbrush or a lighter. But yeah, these tiny pieces that get smaller and smaller. And I knew that that's what the issue was, but I think seeing it in reality, so far from land and so far from people, felt quite crazy.
And I think you said the sailing expedition happened in 2018, but you can correct me about that. I was just wondering when it took place.
Correct.
Okay. And then how long did it take you from there to finish post?
6 years.
6 years, yeah. So that's very typical, and unfortunately for these things. And I'm wondering, could you talk about how you funded the films? I know often these indie projects, they're funded through a variety of means, and I was just wondering if you could talk a little about that.
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was my first feature film, and I worked with Verity Wislocki, who's the producer, and she'd worked on other independent documentary films. And so she had a sense of different avenues that you could take, but it really felt like it was a film about an issue that people didn't want to put money into. Like maybe, I think that the commissioning or the funding sort of goes in real fashions. Like people are like, oh, we've had one film about that, we don't need another one about that, or something. It's sort of quite random, or people have their mind set on, we really need a celebrity to be doing this or something. So it feels like getting those pots of funding from the established documentary funding groups is there's an element of the stars aligning for it as much as there is about other things, I think. So for us, I found out as we were pulling out of the harbour, my husband, the last bit of reception I had, my husband sent me an email that I'd received from a Norwegian funding organisation. I got down to the last two for a £30,000 fund, which would have just been life-changing to make the film. And as we pulled away from the harbour, I found out that I didn't get it, which was really stressful because I had really thought that we would do that. And so I came back and recouped and went back to my day job for a bit, and then we set up a crowdfunder, and that felt like such hard work and really awful, telling everyone I'm quite a shy person. I think this process has made me a lot less shy, but I was quite a shy person, and the idea of asking everyone to tell everyone else that they know about this crowdfunder felt excruciating. But what it did do was build a real community around the film. It was amazing because we had all of these people, whether they were putting in, just like $10, the equivalent of $10, or some people put in a lot more than that. We built this sort of, this army of supporters behind us who were just willing us well for the film. And that got us to the first hurdle of the main bit of the edit. And the Plastic Ocean Foundation topped us up so that we got over the finishing line for our Kickstarter, which was really, really brilliant. And then after that, we basically just got bits of funding here and there. I sold some of the footage to other films or to TV programs, just got little bits of money here and there. Verity, the producer, and I put lots of our own money into it, kept saying we were not just a little bit, but it's really added up over the years. But just to get to the next stage, lots of people, really skilled people, put in their time and energy and skills into the film, either for free or for very reduced rates. So, whether that's composers or grading the film was done by Dirty Looks, who are Soho, a really great London Soho post-production agency house, and they did it all for free for us, which was incredible. And the same with the sound. And we sort of just cobbled it together in different ways. And then towards the end, we had some people put in a few sort of really instrumental chunks of money, like $5,000 or something. And yeah, that's how we did it. So it's been a real sort of patchwork, really hard work and really demoralizing. But, you have to believe in your project enough to keep going, I guess, don't you?
Yeah, these films, they require so much tenacity. I guess I was under the impression things were a little better for European filmmakers, but maybe not so much based on what you're saying. It's just a really tough work.
I think that we actually think that in the US you have better philanthropy or for these sorts of things, maybe better networks, but maybe it's just hard all around.
On a brighter note, as you've been taking the film to festivals and meeting with audiences, what has been the most rewarding part?
Well, honestly, it's been completely amazing because we premiered at a cinema in London in Soho called the Curzon, and it's sort of the main Curzon cinema. That's an independent cinema chain, and as a child, I used to go to the cinema a lot with my dad, maybe like as a teenager. And when I moved to London to study, I used to get on 3 buses to go and watch films in the cinema. I just absolutely loved it. And we had our film premiere for X Trillion there. And they gave us a small screen to start with, but we sold out the big screen. And it was like actually sold out. And to me, that was just incredibly exciting. But it was so scary, and we had a great panel discussion. We had this great BBC journalist chairing the panel, and lots of my family were there, and friends and people that I'd been harping on about the film for the last 6 years to. And my whole body was shaking with fear. And I came out, and there was just such a buzz of everyone who watched the film. They were so excited. I think that maybe they thought it was better than they thought it was going to be. And they really enjoyed it. And I think that's been the thing, is that sitting in a cinema, I've been to all of the screenings that we've had at these cinema screenings in the UK. And you think it'd be kind of unbearable watching the same film that you've already watched 7 million times over and over again. But the feeling you get from the audience and how different it is every time. But also then you hear people laughing in some bits, and that's really exciting, to get people to laugh at a film, at points in a film that you that people might think was sort of kind of boring subject matter or something, but coming out and feeling like they'd been really moved, and that they didn't feel depressed, but that they felt like they'd been through the emotions, and people recounting back to that feeling that they had that goes with the narrative arc, which is exactly what we'd hoped would do, and that's it. And people feeling like they have learned something and motivated to do things differently, but not to feel like it's like they just need to be blamed for the stuff, because that's absolutely not the point. It's just sort of just to try and look at things a bit differently. But yeah, I think that people's emotional response is the most rewarding part of it for me, I think.
And for our audience listening today who may be interested in helping with the plastic problem, what do you suggest? Well,
we are in, so there's the basic things that we can do, which is like really think twice about buying plastic if we need to, buying stuff in packaging if we don't need to. Sometimes, that can feel like a real sort of place of privilege to choose something that isn't covered in plastic rather than a thing that is, or to choose something that's made out of, like clothes made out of lovely natural fibers, because we know that artificial plastic-based fibers are much cheaper. But where you can, just reduce things. And if you're offered some kind of single-use plastic, I don't know what the rules are in the States, but in Europe we've had lots of bans on single-use plastic. But if someone offers you a plastic coffee stirrer or a plastic spoon or whatever it is, just don't take it. And even suggest that maybe they find an alternative, or it depends how brave you're feeling. But try and use less in your own life. But I 100% believe that the onus is not on the consumer or on individuals. We have an infrastructure around us that is really psyching themselves up to just produce more and more plastic, and that's not something that you as an individual can necessarily do too much about. But what we can do is at the end of this month, we have the final international meeting, a UN meeting, which is a global plastics summit, where a treaty will be agreed for most of the countries in the world to agree on an international way forward of how we deal with plastic. So it's a huge, huge moment in time. And when we went on the expedition, that was never on the cards. No one could even imagine that was going to be happening. And here we are, where it is. We've got countries discussing this thing, and they've really woken up to the idea that the individuals, groups of people, companies, different people want better legislation and better infrastructure around it. Now, some countries which are being heavily lobbied want to keep producing plastic but just recycle more, and that is definitely not the answer, because not only is recycling quite confused and not very clear on how much is actually recycled. We actually recycle such a small amount of the plastic we use, but also it's a really carbon intensive industry. In Europe, plastic production is the industry that produces the most carbon, and 40% of that plastic is used for less than 10 minutes. So that's a crazy idea. So there's that. But also we want countries to recognize that it's a health issue, and that there needs to be better legislation to force companies and force design and force different infrastructures to find alternatives, true alternatives, but also reduce what people are exposed to in that way. So I would say that it's a really great moment in time to write to companies, contact companies, write to your local politicians, talk to your local politicians, talk to anyone that you can to make them aware that you know that this meeting is happening, because it's getting very, very little media coverage, and to sort of read up on it if you can, but just make them aware that you want something to happen about it. And I think it seems like sometimes just writing one letter to someone, to a company, might seem like a drop in the ocean, or, you know, a stab in the dark. But all of these things really add up. But, you know, by using less yourself, you're also doing yourself a favor. It's not just a great sort of environmental act. You're reducing your exposure to things that are harmful to you, but also that are going into the environment that will ultimately probably harm somewhere down the line. So, yeah, I don't know if that's a good enough message, but that's where I'm at the moment and what I suggest to people.
Yeah, it's
and I
good.
guess also just very sorry, Heather, I'll just say one last thing. Also, very much like look at in your job, in your workplace, if you're working, or in your profession, see like where you can make differences, because again, another statistic, I can't remember exactly what it was, but shows that the multiplying effect of your actions at work can be massive compared to what you do in your personal life. So if you do both, that's great. One architect, for example, was on one of our panels, and she was saying just by looking and changing a few of the materials that they use in their practice, they're reducing a huge amount of plastic that's happening in their projects. And that's just one example. And sometimes you might think that what you do doesn't have any relevance in this field, but I think if you have a look and think about it, then you probably definitely do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And of course, if people, when they're able to see the film, they'll hear discussions also about what people can do to help the environment in terms of the plastic problem. Now, moving on, you mentioned this was your first feature, although obviously you were already an experienced filmmaker, but I wonder what advice you would give to our first-time documentary filmmakers who may be listening.
I think get your story really sorted. I think before you pick up a camera, just like really work out what your story is and where you're going to go with it, and think about where the human story is within it and who your characters are going to be, and then and then when you feel really tight with what your vision is, then I think just trying to get a really great team of people around you, even if they're not even the production team or have that much to do with film, but can just be really supportive and that you can talk to about it. And then and because sometimes you, again, a bit like in the theme of the film, in that you can draw on other people's professional experience, find people who can help you put together a great pitch deck or different things like that. And I think just having real clarity, there are some great documents out there, but also forms that you often have to fill in for funding that feel like such a drag and a bore, but are actually really helpful in that sometimes you have to describe what your story is, in 30 words or something, or in a short paragraph, and then you go into more detail. And often when I do those, I actually go back to them over the years, and I keep going back to them, and I keep going back to them because they keep you on track with what you're doing. And of course you have to evolve and adapt to what's happening in your story, and you can't have complete control. But I think if you have the core idea of where you're going, that's really important, because often when people want to fund your film, when you're trying to get funding for your film or talk to people about your film, you have to be able to explain what it is really succinctly and in an interesting way. And that's a really hard thing to do. So all of those filling out of forms and things like that for funding are never a lost cause. And then think creatively about how you can get that funding, because the really annoying thing is about being a first-time filmmaker is that people sometimes, often will say, well, that sounds great, but we're not going to fund you because you haven't made any other films for us to see that you can do this. And so it is that chicken and egg situation. So you have to be able to really think outside of the box sometimes, just to get enough money together to even then pick up the camera and start whatever it is that you're doing. And often because people want to see some of what you've done before and then fund the next stage of it. So, but I just say, just keep going and keep the pace, and it will come good. And
tenacity is very important. So I know this film is still in the process of making its way into the world, but for those who are interested in checking it out, could you tell us where the movie is currently available?
Yeah. So if you're in Europe or the Middle East or Africa, you can watch it on Discovery Channel. That's an easy way of watching it. We have a screenings list on our website, and actually where we'll be updating. I've just been updating it now, but we've got lots more community screenings and educational screenings coming up, and I'll put them on there. But it's also, we're a really small team, so basically it's me and Verity, the producer, and then we have a couple of people who help us every now and then. So we don't have the capacity to sort of reach out to loads and loads of people, but we do really want the film to be seen as far and wide as possible. And so there's a form on the website that you can fill out and to arrange a screening near you. And if you do that, then we can support you in that process and work out how that's best going to work for you. And through that, we actually have quite a few that we're in the process of finalising the dates for, and all of those will go up on the website, and they're around the world. So that's one way of seeing it. But so if you can't see a screening near you, but you really want to see the film, then please get in touch, and we can see if you can help us organise one. But then also, we're hoping to get a sales agent. Our sales agents get a sale in the US and also further afield, but it will be eventually available to stream online, but we're not quite there yet. We're still doing the theatrical release, so not
Great.
too long, hopefully.
Yeah, you mentioned people should check out your website for more information. So I want to make sure that people know what that is. So if you could please share your website, the film's website. If you have a personal website you want to share as well as relevant social media handles, I would love to give you the opportunity to do that.
That's really kind. Thank you. So the website for the film is xtrillionfilm.com. And there are there's lots more information on there, and then we have an Instagram handle which is xtrillionfilm, and then we also have a Facebook page. But I'd say most of the stuff happens through Instagram, and that's where you can find us. And my personal work is under larkrisepictures.com, which is that's quite varied, lots of work. And but I think xtrillionfilm.com is the best place to find more information. And also, if you're interested in what Emily Penn does, then there's xexpedition.com, and she also has a platform called Shift. So it's Join the Shift, and that gives you some ideas of what you can do in terms of making change and being part of solutions and things like that. So there's all sorts of stuff, but you can find those links through the X Trillion Film website as well.
Terrific. And speaking of making change, I know you mentioned in your bio that some of your past work has led to policy change, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I can give you one example. So I used to do undercover investigations. It's actually how I met my husband. He works in human rights, and we were both working for a human rights organisation. I would do the filming, and he very much did the research. And we went to Thailand and Myanmar together a few times because prawns that were shrimp that are being sold in US supermarkets and European supermarkets were often coming from Thailand, and so there were various issues in the different stages of the supply chain. So not only where the shrimp was growing and being cultivated, there are issues in that, but there are things called peeling sheds, which is a bit random. People probably don't think about it, but it's where the prawns are peeled, and there was forced labour happening in those peeling sheds. And many of the people working there were from Myanmar and had been trafficked into Thailand. And then that was one part of the campaign that we made a film about that, but then also a short film. But then further up even lower down the supply chain, there are men who, again, are trafficked onto fishing boats in Thailand, and they were fishing for fish that's called trash fish that's used in the shrimp feed, to feed the shrimp. And they were going out to sea for months at a time, and when they came back to land, they were being basically locked in rooms and not allowed out, and they weren't being paid. Some of them were murdered, others were being tortured as a way of keeping them on the boat. And some people were making lots of money out of this, but the workers themselves were just having, obviously, a really horrific time. And so it's very much a case of modern-day slavery and trafficking. And we travelled back and forth to the communities and then worked with the equivalent of the Thai FBI to raid some of these places where the people were being kept, because there was corruption with the local police. So it had to go above that. And we, my husband wrote the reports with people from our organisation, and I made some films about it, and they were shown to the EU, but then also taken to the US State Department and presented there. And the US were going to upgrade Thailand in their human trafficking list, which is probably something that most people don't know about, but basically means that they're doing a great job on addressing the human trafficking issues. And then it means that they have more access to more markets and they're under less strict regulations and things like that. But we managed to prove that this was happening, and then it downgraded them, which meant that then the companies that were selling to the US and the EU had to work much harder to ensure that those sorts of things weren't happening in their supply chains. So that's one example. It's kind of geeky and a bit random because most people wouldn't think about that. But I've done lots of stuff to do with illegal fishing and people working on fishing boats in West Africa as well, and fish that comes into the EU, and then also things to do with climate refugees, people displaced because of climate change, and addressing their rights and recognising their rights, and different things like that, really.
Wow. I mean, I had no idea you did all this stuff. It's super fascinating. Do you also want to tell us a little bit about your commercial work that you do?
Yeah. So most of the commercial work I do is through photography. And so I've been really lucky, actually, to mainly work on projects or for companies that I really like their work and think that they align with my values, I guess. And so I work with different companies that sourcing, like, that go above and beyond responsible sourcing for like trainers or different, or like fashion or things like that. But actually, most of my other work that I get commissioned to do might be some recent work has been through a UK supermarket, and that's actually, they funded work to do with human rights on fishing boats in the UK. Lots of fishing going on in my life. But also, like at the moment, I'm working on a really big project for the UN about EU integration in the Western Balkans. So all of the Western Balkan countries, ex-Yugoslavia, are in their journey to the EU and looking at how the UN is supporting them and things like that. So it's kind of not very commercial work. I should probably do some more high-end commercial work, then I'd get paid a lot more money and would probably have to work a lot less hard. But I'm really lucky to do work that pays the bills but also really interests me, and I get to constantly be trying to understand how the world works a bit more, which I think when I finished school was my main ambition. I just wanted to understand how the world works, how people work, and it's a real privilege to be able to do that.
Yeah, your work sounds amazing. I'm always hesitant to ask filmmakers this question when they're in the middle of promoting a film that's taken a long time to make, because I know promoting a film is just a huge job and often unpaid. But is there anything new that you're working on that you feel like sharing with the audience?
Yeah, it's actually really relevant to today, I guess. There's this really brilliant woman called Laura Tenenbaum who used to be the climate science communicator at NASA. And then when Trump was first elected, NASA was actively encouraged to stop talking about climate change. And she didn't feel like she could stop talking about climate change, and she lost her job, and it's been problematic. Now, she's a really brilliant, vivacious, slightly wild, really smart, funny, and what do you call it? Really likable, approachable person. And she's a great scientist, but she brings science to people in a way that just makes sense and feels very unboring and unsciencey, if that makes sense. And we've been developing a project with Verity, who's the producer of Xtrillion, and her. Well, we've been developing a series and a one-off project looking at. We were looking at before the election something to do with that followed the campaign trail, but looking at it from a climate angle, but also like really trying to understand, like take a litmus test of the US and where people are on climate change, and where people maybe people are understanding it in reality in their lives, in terms of the economics of it, in terms of various different things, and exploring that. But on a bigger scale and more longer term, we're looking at a series that's about system change, and that might be to do big subjects like food or housing or different things like that. But then also one of the episodes is about happiness, and then just looking at how we can basically look at how we live now and how we could do that completely differently, and how people are doing it differently, but how that doesn't have to be, again, something that's coming from a place of privilege, that is actually just makes sense and would make people's lives better and nicer, but then also in turn be really important in terms of doing something about climate change. I haven't explained it very well because I obviously haven't got my pitch down like I was telling filmmakers to do, because it's been changing quite a lot recently. But that's kind of the gist of it. So there we go.
That's super interesting. I'm glad you have the energy to keep pushing forward and do something else. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to share with us before we wrap up?
Just to say that energy ebbs and flows on the day. No, I don't think so. I just think that, I'd love as many people to see the film, as many people as possible to see the film if they can, and I hope it comes to somewhere near you. But do get in touch if you would like to organise a screening. But also that, I guess in the face, maybe being a bit philosophical here, but in the face of like really big problems and maybe this like big sense of negativity and division and different things like that might feel is prominent in your country and in my country as well, with around politics and things like that, is that I really believe that the majority of people are good people and that we can come to great solutions together, and we just have to keep remembering that and be kind to each other, and then everything else will follow. And that feels quite hard, but I think that maybe just sort of, I guess, relating to the film is that it feels like you can really be just talking in your echo chambers preaching to the choir, we say here. I don't know if you say that in the US. And maybe we need to really I tried really hard with Extrillion to try and make it a film that was interesting to people beyond those who are already interested in the environment, or, women doing things and different stuff like that. And maybe that's sort of what we need to be doing with everything, and just sort of try and be talking to each other more, and then we'll get some better solutions. We can all live better lives on this planet, something like that.
Well, yes, let's hope that that's the case. Thank you for sharing that wisdom and advice with all of us. So thank you so much, Eleanor, for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I know you're incredibly busy, and, it's a great film. I hope our audience is able to check it out and that it gets wider distribution soon.
Oh, thanks so much, Heather. It's been really nice talking to you.
It's our pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for listening.
Now, in its second edition, Carol Dean's popular book, The Art of Film Funding, has 12 new chapters to cover all areas of film financing and how to avoid expensive pitfalls. Learn how to start with an idea and end with a trailer, how to make an ask for money, create your story structure and your trailer, legal advice, fair use, successful crowdfunding, how to ask for music rights, and what insurance you can't shoot without. Available on Amazon under Carol Dean and at FromTheHeartProductions.com. I want to remind our listeners that David Rakelin is a brilliant and talented award-winning musician who scores films and can compose music for a trio or for a full orchestra. David is a very good friend to the independent filmmaker and comes highly recommended by From the Heart Productions. If you need music to help tell your story, please contact him at davidrakelin.com. That's David, RAIKLEN.com. And Carol and I want to thank you for tuning in to The Art of Film Funding. Please visit our website at FromTheHeartProductions.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Good luck with your films, everyone.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University. value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.
It can get lonely climbing Mount McKinley, so to entertain myself, I go to ChumbaCasino.com. At Chumba Casino, I can play hundreds of online casino-style games for free, like online slots, bingo, Slingo, and more. Plus, I get a daily login bonus. It's just too bad that up here, I don't have anyone to share my excitement with. Woohoo! Woohoo!
Live the Chumba life. Anytime, anywhere. Play for free now at ChumbaCasino.com. BGW Group. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.